This is our fifth and final episode for the month of November, and I am so thrilled we went on this journey together. If you recall from the first episode of this year, the plan for 2025 on the Mythological Africans podcast is to focus on myths and folklore related to landforms and the natural world, with detours into the realm of psychology and history. This month's concentration on creation myths, with examples from Cameroon, Botswana, Sierra Leone, and Mali, was one stop along this path, but we have come a long way. We've trekked through the Central African forests with the Baka and other of the continent's forest peoples. We stopped by Cameroon's volcanic lakes, visited fishing communities in Ghana, crossed the Sahara Desert with the Tuareg, scaled mountain peaks in Morocco and Algeria, sailed up the Nile, paddled around Lake Victoria. We've also stopped to see the Kariba Dam, walked the Masai Mara, meditated in Kenya's Kilifi Caves, and then examined some urban legends with a deep dive into some creatures which have triggered mass panic events in Tanzania, Kenya, and elsewhere on the continent. Additionally, we stopped to reflect on how these stories carve themselves on the landscape of our minds, with a brief discussion on how we might use this to deepen our understanding of ourselves as individuals, but also as communities still grappling with the turmoil of the colonial era. So we've done pretty good so far, if I do say so myself, and I really do want to thank everyone who has stuck around for it all. In this week's episode of the podcast, we round up the conversation about creation myths with a comment on African foundation legends. Hello friends, and welcome to the Mythological Africans podcast, where we read and talk about stories from African mythology and folklore. I am your host, Helen Nde. I ran into a bit of a problem while doing the research for the first section of my book, the Watkins Book of African Folklore. That section, by the way, is titled Creation Myths and Foundation Legends, but it was originally supposed to be titled just Creation Myths. The problem I ran into was that many stories classed as creation myths in the African context are actually foundation legends or genealogies in the strictest sense of the word. That is, they are not stories about the creation of the world per se with the expected metaphysical connotations. They're simply accounts of how the person or group, recognized as the first ancestor or ancestors of the people in question, came to be in the geographical location they claim as home. An example of this is the story of the first humans as told by the Oromo people of Eastern Africa. And that story starts with a man falling down from the sky, wandering the earth, and then eventually running into footprints which look like his. So he follows the footprints and eventually meets another human being which turns out to be a woman, and the rest, as they say, is history, or mythology in this case. Many of the themes in this story are common to the continent, including that interesting tidbit about the man falling from the sky. As it turns out, this too is a common theme from the continent, but it has nothing to do with alien arrivals, and you should buy and read my book if you want to know more. There's a whole section dedicated to this in the book. So the Oromo myth starts this way, but then leads into the genealogy of different Oromo or Oromo adjacent peoples, like the Borana, the Konso, the Gabra, and the Shangala. So we cannot exactly classify this myth as an example of the earth diver creation myth type. This is because the man arrives to earth that's already been formed and is inhabited by other beings. In the earth diver myth type, the being, be it a human being or some other cosmic entity, falls down into cosmic nothingness, if you want to call it that, and they are the ones who secure the portion of the earth. So if you remember, in the Batanga myth from Cameroon, which we talked about, I believe in the first episode, one of the beings dives into water and then secures a bit of land that becomes earth. And similarly, in the Yoruba creation myth, Obatala comes down from the realm of the Orishas and secures a piece in the cosmic waters of Olokun, I believe, that then becomes the earth where humans and everything else ends up existing. So the difference between earth diver type myths and these myths where people fall down from the sky is that in the earth diver creation myth type, the earth diver is who starts the piece of land that becomes Earth. Meanwhile, in these other foundation legends, as I'm calling them, they come to a land that's already been created, that is already populated. Similarly, the story of the first man and woman, as told by the Luba of the Democratic Republic of Congo, simply starts with a man and a woman who lived, though unaware of each other, on the right bank of the Lualabala River. This story too might be classified as an example of the world parent creation myth type. So you have a man and a woman, or a masculine and feminine entity that copulate, so to speak, to create everything that exists. Except this man and this woman didn't create the world. They simply started the line of Luba people, and Kongolo, the first divine king of the Luba, is their son. The legend of the first man and woman, according to the Kabyle people in Algeria, is similar. Earth already exists. The first man and woman just find each other in an underground cave. Then they mate, they birth 50 sons and daughters, and then they emerge from this cave to populate the earth. So again, one could classify this as an example of the underground emergence with a dash of the world parent theme thrown in. But it's not exactly the case in the strictest sense of the words. Being raised on the biblical account of creation, with God first creating the whole world and then creating Adam and Eve, a part of me kind of saw these myths as incomplete when I started reading them. That was a conception of a creation myth in my mind. God makes the world and then makes humans. But then as I read more and more and more of these stories from across the continent, I started making peace with the fact that it's quite possible that for many African people, the assumption was simply that we are here because the great, immanent, and yet withdrawn Creator wills it to be so, and it's up to us to make sense of our experience. My suspicion is that this truly was the case for many African people, and that story began to change, and the part about the Creator making the earth got added on when missionaries asked about the origins of the people, and they got the foundation legend, and then they probed and said, well, what came before these founding father and founding mother? And people had to come up with something. There's a part of me that just imagines the people that the missionaries or the explorers talked to kind of looking at them a little nonplussed and confused, like, well, the Creator made them, obviously, made all the plants and the animals and everything else, and then made the first man and woman, and they were on the side of the river, and then these bits got added on as part of the creation myth. But then creation myths and foundation legends, they kind of fold into each other, so this might be splitting hairs a bit. But I wanted to highlight this phenomenon because I imagine other people who look at African mythology might have a reaction similar to mine. And then there are, of course, those who let their racist assumptions run wild about African intellectual capacity or lack of curiosity about, the origins of the world and blah, blah, blah. But there are more than enough African creation myths with complex metaphysical implications, even as they preserve stories of arrivals and migrations. So I'm not even going to let these folks take up any more space in the conversation. This is the mythological African's way. And so having come to this point, I look at all these episodes from this year, and what I find is that the thread running through all of them is a reminder that what makes us African is our connection to the continent, no matter where we may find ourselves in the world. What makes us African is our remembrance of the land, of the waters, of the plants, the animals, the lineages, both great and small, known and unknown, whose collective existence is inextricably bound to ours, and whose destruction would be ours as well. What makes us African is our commitment to honoring this truth in all ways that we possibly can. And so we'll stop here for the week, but I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week and next month, because we will close the year with one of my favorite African writers of all time, Ibrahim Al-Koni. He's Libyan and wrote one of the best books I've ever read in my life, The Animist, and it's called the Tariq Epic, and don't even get me started on it. I've done multiple episodes on the book, so go dig into the Mythological Africans archives if you want to hear more. I'll probably put a couple of links in the episode notes. But his work was supposed to be part of this year's examination of landform-related mythology from the African continent, so I want to make sure that we get a bit of that in. And so for the month of December, I'll read his book, The Bleeding of the Stone, and it's a book that traces the experiences of a Bedouin man's relationship with the Sahara Desert and its creatures. So it's right up our alley, and I hope you join in if you want to hear more about it. Thank you as always for listening.